There was a day you stopped crying. Not a decision. A door closing so quietly you didn't feel it shut. You could probably still find that day, if you were honest with yourself for the next few minutes. I'm not going to ask you to cry tonight. I'm going to ask you something harder. To remember why you stopped. Somewhere in your memory, if you go looking, there's a room. Maybe it's a kitchen. Maybe it's a car, parked in a driveway, engine still ticking as it cools. Maybe it's a hallway outside a bedroom door that wouldn't open no matter how long you stood there. There's a specific light in that memory, a specific smell, a specific face looking down at you with an expression you didn't have a name for yet, but understood immediately anyway. Something happened in that room. Not necessarily something dramatic. Sometimes it's smaller than that, which is exactly why it worked so well. A sigh. That's enough now. You're fine. A silence where comfort should have been, so complete that you learned, faster than any lesson you were ever taught in a classroom, that whatever had just opened in your chest needed to close, immediately, and never open like that again. You were how old? 6? 9? 12? Old enough to understand the message, too young to question whether the message was true. And you obeyed it. Perfectly. For the rest of your life, so far. Notice something about that memory, now that you found it. You can probably still feel an echo of what you felt in that exact moment, not just remember it intellectually, but feel a faint version of it in your chest right now, reading this. That's not a coincidence, and it's not you being dramatic. Unprocessed feeling doesn't fade the way memories of ordinary events do. It stays live, stored at full voltage, waiting for permission that never came. Here is the painful truth, and I want you to actually let it land instead of skimming past it the way you've skimmed past every version of this feeling since that day in the kitchen, the car, the hallway. You didn't become strong that day. You became silent, and somewhere along the way, someone, maybe even you, started calling the silence strength, because that was easier than looking directly at what it actually cost. Every version of masculinity you've been sold since has built on top of that same foundation. Stay unbothered. Stay detached. Never let them see it land. You've gotten so good at this that you've probably started to believe it's who you actually are, rather than who you became in a moment you didn't choose, defending yourself against a pain nobody helped you carry. I need to tell you something that almost no one in this space will tell you, because it's better for business to keep selling you coldness as the goal. The actual Stoics never taught this. Not the real ones. Marcus Aurelius wrote that gentleness is more manly than rage, in the same private notebook men quote today to justify becoming unreachable. Seneca, one of the most disciplined minds in history, openly admitted being overcome by grief when he lost people he loved, and never once treated that grief as a failure of his philosophy. Epictetus warned his students directly that a man who loses the capacity to feel has not achieved mastery. He has become something less than human, closer to a wild animal than a sage, mistaking numbness for the discipline he was actually supposed to be building. You were taught a lie with a stoic face on it. Tonight, we're going to take the face off. By the end of this, you will understand the difference between the discipline the Stoics actually taught and the emotional amputation you mistook for it. And you will know exactly how to find the day you stopped crying, without needing to fall apart to do it. 9 lessons. Not exercises in becoming colder. Exercises in becoming whole again. If some part of you already knows there's a room, a car, a hallway in your memory that this hook just pointed toward, comment, "There was a day," below. Not the details. Just that. Let it be the first honest thing you've admitted about this, maybe ever. Lesson 1. The difference between discipline and amputation. Discipline is a muscle you build on purpose, with your eyes open, because you've decided something matters more than the discomfort of practicing it. Amputation is a wound you didn't choose, that healed over wrong, that you've spent years mistaking for muscle because it's hard now too, in its own way, and hard has always been the only kind of strong you were taught to recognize. The confusion between these two is not an accident, and it's worth understanding why it happens so easily. Both discipline and amputation produce the same visible result from the outside, a man who doesn't crack under pressure, who stays composed when others fall apart, who can be relied on in a crisis. From a distance, they look identical. It's only up close, only in the private moments no camera or audience ever sees, that the difference becomes impossible to hide. A disciplined man, alone, at night, can still feel the full weight of his life. An amputated man, alone, at night, often feels almost nothing at all, and mistakes that nothing for peace, when it is actually just distance from himself grown so large he can no longer see across it. Here's how you tell the difference, and it matters more than almost anything else in this video. Discipline can be turned off. A disciplined man can choose, in the right moment, with the right person, to let his guard down completely, and nothing breaks. Amputation cannot be turned off, because there's nothing left to turn off. You didn't build a wall you can open on command. You lost a room in the house entirely, and you've been decorating the outside of that missing room for years, hoping no one asks to go inside. Think about the last time someone you trusted completely asked how you were really doing, and meant it. Really sat with the question instead of expecting the two-word answer. What happened in your chest in that moment? For a lot of men, the honest answer is nothing happened, because nothing could. The door had been closed so long the hinges had rusted shut. Think, too, about the last funeral you attended where you were expected to be the strong one, the one who organized things, carried things, made sure everyone else was okay. You did it well. Everyone said so afterward. And somewhere in the parking lot, or the drive home, or 3 days later at your desk for no visible reason, something tried to surface, and you handled it the way you handle everything. You got busy. You told yourself there wasn't time. There is always time. What there wasn't, was permission. Marcus Aurelius did not rule an empire by amputating his ability to feel loss. He ruled it while grieving children who died before him, while missing friends the wars took, while carrying a private notebook specifically because he needed somewhere to put what he felt, not somewhere to prove he felt nothing. You thought you were building strength. Until life taught you that you'd actually been building a very convincing wall around an empty room, and calling the wall the whole house. Lesson 2. Where the door actually closed. I want you to actually go looking for this, not as a metaphor, but as a real memory, because vague self-help language is exactly how this pattern survives another year unexamined. Most men can find it if they're honest. It's rarely one single catastrophic event. More often it's a repeated, quiet lesson, delivered by people who loved you and had no idea what they were teaching. A father who left the room when things got emotional, not out of cruelty, but because his own door had closed decades before yours, and he had nothing to teach you except the same silence he'd been handed. A mother who said, "Boys don't," 3 words that did more architectural damage to a child's inner life than almost anything else in the English language. A locker room, a schoolyard, a moment of being laughed at for something that felt like the most vulnerable thing you'd ever shown anyone, and the lesson landed permanently in under 60 seconds. None of this requires anyone to be a villain. That's actually the hardest part to accept, and the part that keeps men stuck the longest, because it's easier to be angry at a clear villain than to grieve a wound nobody meant to give you. This is worth sitting with a moment longer, because most men rush past it toward blame or toward absolution, and both are ways of avoiding the actual work. Your father, if he was the one who left the room, was very likely doing exactly what was done to him, by someone who was doing exactly what was done to them, in a chain stretching back further than either of you can trace. That doesn't erase what it cost you. It just means the villain you're looking for, if you insist on finding one, is a pattern, not a person, and patterns can be interrupted in a way that people, frozen in memory, cannot. Jung, pronounced Jung, and worth learning to say correctly if you're going to keep quoting him, wrote about the wounds we carry forward without examining, how they operate from behind the curtain of our adult behavior long after we've forgotten the original scene that created them. You are not choosing, every day, to stay closed. You are running old code, written by a child who had no other option, and never updated since. Find the room. Find the age. You don't have to say it out loud to anyone. Just find it, honestly, before we go any further. If you found it, even just the shape of it, even without the exact details, comment, "I found the room," below. This is the hardest comment in this entire video to type. Type it anyway. Lesson 3. What the silence actually cost you. Here is where most men get uncomfortable, because up to this point, this could still be framed as an interesting idea. From here, it becomes a receipt. Every relationship where you couldn't fully show up, the woman who said you felt distant even when you were trying, the friend who eventually stopped calling because talking to you felt like talking to a wall, the child who will grow up, if you have one or will have one, learning the exact same lesson from watching you that you learned from watching whoever taught you first, all of it traces back to that door. This is not about blame. It's about honest accounting. You cannot fix a cost you've never actually calculated. Most men avoid this calculation their entire lives, because the total is more than they're prepared to look at in one sitting. Picture the specific moment, if you have one, when someone who loved you said some version of, "I don't know how to reach you." Maybe she said it crying, maybe she said it exhausted, maybe she said it as she was already halfway out the door. In that moment, some part of you probably felt the accusation was unfair, because you were there, you provided, you showed up in every way you'd been taught mattered. What you couldn't see, because the door had been closed so long you'd forgotten it was a door at all, was that showing up and being reachable had quietly become two entirely different things, and you'd only ever been trained to do the first one. Seneca warned that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, but there's a version of that warning that applies specifically here. The suffering you're avoiding by staying closed is smaller, almost always, than the suffering you're already living inside without naming it, the low hum of disconnection in every relationship that matters to you, the sense of being fundamentally alone even in a room full of people who love you. You thought staying closed protected you from pain. Until life taught you it just spread the same pain out over a much longer timeline, and handed pieces of it to everyone who ever tried to get close to you. Lesson 4. The anger that isn't actually anger. Almost every man who has done this work eventually discovers the same thing, and it's worth naming directly so you don't have to discover it the hard way over another decade. A huge amount of what you've called your temper, your edge, your intensity, is grief wearing a mask, because grief was never allowed through the front door, so it learned to come in dressed as something more acceptable. Anger was never banned the way crying was. Nobody ever said, "Boys don't get angry." Anger got a permission slip that grief never received, so grief learned to disguise itself as anger just to survive, just to have somewhere to go. This is why certain moments hit you far harder than they should, logically. The argument that shouldn't have escalated. The slight that shouldn't have stayed with you for days. Somewhere in that reaction, old grief is riding along, using the one emotional exit you were ever taught was acceptable for a man to use. Think of the last time a small thing at work, or a minor comment from someone who barely matters to you, put you in a foul mood for the rest of the day, disproportionate to what actually happened. That disproportion is data, not a character flaw. It's a signal that something much older got triggered by something much smaller, and borrowed the moment to finally get some air. Epictetus taught that we suffer not from events themselves, but from the judgments we layer onto them. But underneath even that teaching is something simpler that gets lost in translation for this audience. He never said don't feel the event. He said examine what you're actually feeling, honestly, instead of automatically reaching for whichever emotion your training approved of. The next time anger rises faster or harder than the moment seems to justify, try asking, privately, before you act on it, what is this actually protecting? You might be surprised how often the honest answer is something much softer, wearing anger like a borrowed coat because it was the only coat it was ever handed. Lesson 5. Marcus Aurelius grieved loudly, by the standard of his time, and it changed nothing about how history remembers him. I want to sit with this longer than the earlier mention, because it's the single most important corrective in this entire video, and almost no one in this genre will actually make you sit with it. He lost multiple children. Historians count at least 8 of his children who died before adulthood, in an era where that grief was common but never made lighter by its familiarity. He wrote about loss directly, about the pain of losing people who were owed more time than they got, about the specific difficulty of continuing to rule, continuing to function, while carrying that weight. He did not write himself a permission slip to feel nothing. He wrote himself instructions for how to keep functioning while feeling everything, which is an entirely different discipline than the one you've actually been practicing. Picture him, for a moment, receiving news of a child's death while managing a war on the frontier, a plague moving through his empire, senators demanding decisions he didn't have the luxury to delay. He did not have the option to fall apart for a month. But nothing in the historical record suggests he simply stopped feeling it in order to keep functioning. He found a way to hold both, the grief, real and total, and the duty, real and total, without amputating either one to make room for the other. This is worth contrasting directly with the version of Stoicism sold to you now. That version says, don't let it touch you, stay above it, remain unbothered no matter what arrives. The actual historical man wrote the opposite instruction to himself, over and over, in language that reads less like armor and more like a father teaching himself, repeatedly, how to keep breathing through something unbearable without letting the empire crumble in the process. That is a completely different skill than not feeling it at all, and it is immeasurably harder to develop, which is probably exactly why the easier, colder version is the one that got marketed to you instead. You thought his strength was the absence of feeling. Until you understood it was the presence of feeling, carried alongside function, which is immeasurably harder than what you've been practicing, and infinitely more honest. If this section is landing somewhere real, comment, I carry both, below. Not because it's easy yet. Because it's the actual goal, and naming the goal is the first step toward it. Lesson 6. Why you built achievement instead of feeling it. Look at what you've actually built in the years since that door closed. For a lot of men, it's impressive from the outside. A career. A body. A reputation for being the reliable one, the calm one, the one who doesn't rattle. All of it real. None of it accidental. But ask yourself honestly what that building was actually for. Sometimes achievement is chosen from genuine desire. And sometimes, more often than most men are willing to admit, it's a very sophisticated distraction, a way of staying so occupied, so effective, so externally successful, that there's never quiet enough left over for the room with the closed door to be noticed. This is why some men feel a strange emptiness right after hitting a goal they worked years for. Not because the goal wasn't worth it. Because the achievement was never actually about the achievement. It was about outrunning something, and for one dangerous moment after crossing the finish line, there's nothing left to outrun it with, and the old feeling catches up. You know this moment if you've had it. The promotion that should have felt like triumph and instead felt strangely hollow within days. The house, the number in the account, the physique built over years of discipline in the gym, all real accomplishments, all genuinely earned, and still, underneath the satisfaction, a quiet, persistent question you've never let yourself finish asking: is this actually it? That question isn't ingratitude. It's the sound of the real work, the room with the closed door, still waiting patiently for you to notice it was never actually about the achievement at all. Nietzsche wrote that a man who has a why to live can bear almost any how. But a why built entirely to avoid feeling something is not actually a why. It's a treadmill dressed up as a destination, and it will never deliver the peace it was quietly promising you the whole time you were running on it. Lesson 7. The specific fear underneath staying closed. Let's name it directly, because vague discomfort is easy to keep avoiding, and specific fear is much harder to keep avoiding once it has a name. The fear is this: if you actually opened that door, actually let yourself feel the full weight of whatever happened in that room, that car, that hallway, you're afraid it might not stop. That there's more in there than you could survive feeling all at once. That the boy who learned to close the door was, in some way, protecting the man you'd eventually become from something too large to carry. Here is the truth, and it is one of the few genuine promises I can make you in this entire video. It will not be bottomless. Grief, even old grief, even grief you've been avoiding for 20 or 30 years, has an actual bottom. It moves through you, fully felt, and it changes into something else, not gone, but no longer running your entire nervous system from behind a locked door. What keeps it feeling infinite is precisely the avoidance. A feeling you've never once let yourself fully experience stays frozen at its original size forever, because it never gets the chance to move through and complete itself. The fear is not that it will destroy you. The fear is real, but the actual danger was always smaller than the story you built around never testing it. Let me tell you what this looks like in an actual life, because I don't want this to stay abstract for you. Picture a man in his 40s, successful by every visible measure, standing at his own father's funeral, delivering a eulogy without his voice once breaking, receiving compliments afterward on how strong he was, how composed, how he held the whole family together that day. He drives home. He goes back to work 3 days later, exactly on schedule. Everyone is impressed. He is impressed with himself, in the quiet, complicated way that comes from performing exactly the role he was trained his whole life to perform. 11 months later, he is standing in a hardware store, looking at a specific brand of work gloves his father used to wear, and something breaks open without warning, right there in the aisle, over gloves, of all things, not because the gloves matter, but because 11 months of avoided grief finally found a door small enough to slip through unnoticed. He will tell people later it came out of nowhere. It did not come out of nowhere. It came from exactly where it had been waiting the entire time, patiently, for a door his conscious mind wasn't guarding closely enough to stop it. This is what avoidance actually does. It doesn't eliminate the feeling. It just removes your ability to choose when and where it finally arrives. Lesson 8. What actually happens when you find the day? This is not a call to dramatically break down in front of people, to perform vulnerability as a new kind of achievement, to swap one form of self-image management for another. That would just be a new mask. What actually happens, for most men who do this quietly and honestly, is smaller and far more private than the movies make it look. A memory surfaces, fully, maybe for the first time in decades. There might be tears, alone, in a car, at night, in a moment nobody else ever needs to witness. There might just be a long exhale, and a strange, unfamiliar looseness in the chest where tightness has lived for so long it started to feel like your natural resting state. This is not weakness arriving late. This is a debt finally being paid, quietly, on your own terms, in your own time. Some men describe it afterward as feeling lighter in a very literal, physical sense, a tightness in the jaw or the shoulders they'd carried so long they'd stopped registering it as tension at all, simply as their normal resting state, finally releasing. Others describe it as the first full night of sleep they've had in years, not because anything external changed, but because the nervous system finally stopped guarding a door it had been holding shut, at cost, every single hour of every single day, for decades. Afterward, and this is the part almost no one tells you, you do not become soft in the way you feared. You become more solid, not less, because you're no longer spending enormous, constant, unconscious energy keeping a door shut against a pressure that was always going to eventually find a way out, one way or another, on its own schedule instead of yours. Lesson 9. The final law. Strength was never the absence of feeling. It was always the capacity to feel completely, and still choose your next action deliberately, rather than letting either the feeling or its suppression make the choice for you. This is what the real Stoics actually taught, underneath everything the internet has done to their names. Not a man carved from stone, incapable of being moved. A man capable of being moved completely, who still shows up, still leads, still keeps his word, precisely because he's not spending his entire life managing a wound he's never let himself name. You began this by hearing that there was a day you stopped crying. You ended understanding that the day doesn't have to be the whole story. It was the beginning of a chapter, not the entire book, and chapters can be revisited, understood, even grieved properly for the first time, decades later than they happened, and it is not too late to do that. There will be a night, maybe soon, where something small cracks the door open again without warning, a song, a movie, a moment with your own child if you have one, a memory arriving uninvited in the quiet right before sleep. In that moment, you will be handed a choice you've been making automatically your entire adult life, without ever recognizing it as a choice. Close the door again, the way you always have, and confirm that nothing here tonight actually changed you. Or let it open, just slightly, just for a few minutes, in private, on your own terms, and find out what's actually been waiting on the other side of it for so long. Marcus Aurelius grieved real losses while ruling a real empire, and history remembers him as one of the strongest men who ever lived, not despite that grief, but with it fully included in the picture. If he could hold both, so can you. Somewhere out there is a version of you who never opens that door. Who keeps building the achievements, keeps managing the reputation, keeps mistaking the wall for the whole house, until the day arrives, late in life, when there's finally nothing left to outrun it with. Maybe it arrives at his own father's funeral, delivering the same composed eulogy, teaching the same lesson to a son sitting in the front row, watching closely, the way you once watched someone who taught you. That version of you is not a villain either. He's just a man who never got the video that told him there was another way. You are not required to become him. Everything in this video was the beginning of a different path, laid out honestly, waiting only for you to take the first quiet step. Tonight, I'm not going to ask you to cry. I already told you that at the start, and I meant it. I'm going to ask you something smaller, and harder in its own way. Find the room. Find the age. Let yourself remember it fully, once, for a few minutes, without rushing to close the door again the second it starts to open. You don't owe anyone an explanation for what that brings up. Not even yourself, not yet. Just let it be there, unresolved, without immediately reaching for the achievement, the anger, or the silence to smooth it back over the way you always have. That discomfort is not your enemy. It is the exact place where the boy who closed the door finally gets to meet the man who's ready to open it. If you're finding that room again tonight, for the first time in years, comment, "I'm opening the door," below. Let it be the last thing you type tonight, instead of pushing the feeling back down the way you always have. And if this reached the part of you that's been waiting a long time to hear it, subscribe to my Stoic code. Because the next law you learn might be the one that finally lets you feel whole again.